Good evening. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. And believe me, in my 21 years as a classroom teacher, I've had my share of struggles. But I'd like to think that these struggles have led to progress. So let's peel back and think about each year, how we measure ourselves. And we know that progress is important. AYP, anybody? No Child Left Behind? And we understand that when we're talking about AYP and No Child Left Behind, we have to peel back the different levels to see how our students are achieving. When we peel back the levels, we also notice that we have that achievement gap. When we have that achievement gap, we have to figure out what can we do to make sure that all of our students have access to what is necessary to make sure that everybody is growing each and every year. The U.S. system of education is based on certain models of knowing and learning specific information, specific facts in certain ways. And if you don't learn it in specific ways or behave in certain ways, there's the connotation that you're doing it the wrong way. But if you're coming to school and you're not using language or talking about facts or seeing achievements that are modeled after people and the accomplishments that look like you, then there's sometimes a disconnect. But there's a disconnect that we can do something about. This is where culturally relevant literacy belongs. This is how we can make sure that all of our students are moving forward. We value knowing multiple language. So what about knowing multiple cultures? Celebrating the cultures and the diversity of all of the students who we teach each and every day. Culture and difference is not a bad word. It's something that we have to embrace. It's something that we have to acknowledge. It's something that we have to address if we're going to move our students forward. And in doing that, identity matters. Identity is rooted in the literature that we expose our students to. It's rooted in what we have on our very walls in our classroom. It's about representation. And representation is more than looking at literature that focuses on stories of oppression. It's more than looking at stories that focus on slavery, more than stories that look at the civil rights movement, more than stories that are looking at struggles of overcoming things like gang violence, because that's not the whole identity. And if we are going to move our students forward and prepare them to be successful in a world that is rapidly enclosing in and diversifying, we have to make sure that we're giving them the opportunity to learn about various types of people in productive and proactive ways. Identity and representation matters. So what does this mean? Think about the very images that you have on your classroom wall. Think about your anticipatory set, the very images that you're showing on your projection. Think about the vignettes and the stories and the scenarios that you use. Think about the math problems that you use. Think about the stories. Can you have a story of a young student who is learning how to swim, but he's a student who's brown or black? Showing that there are many similarities to what we have so that we can help demystify the differences that we have and show people that everybody matters. Literacy is the gateway to success. It's the gateway to power. But if I'm not making the connections, how am I going to access the literacy that's in front of me? And it requires deliberate effort to make this change. And the beauty is, as classroom teachers, in building administrators, we have agency. We can't wait for policy to change. We ourselves can look for books that are showing different cultures, different dynamics, because the reality is, whether or not we have that level of diversity sitting in our classroom every day, we are trying to prepare our students to be college, career, and citizen ready. And in this stage, that means being able to be comfortable and competent enough to interact with all types of people. But how are we preparing them to interact with all types of people if we're not suggesting and exposing them to the beauty of diversity that we have through the literacy that we have, through the images that we have? Again, representation, and identity matters. And let's talk about language. Because the reality is you cannot access this if you do not have access to language. And just like we know that there is an achievement gap, we know that there is a vocabulary gap as well. So we have to start thinking about the words that we use every day in our classes. Many of us may be familiar with code switching, right? Code switching, the whole notion that students may bring their outside language in. And as educators, we often think it's our responsibility, if we're going to prepare them for success, to teach them the right way to speak to be successful. But what are we suggesting to these students about the culture that they're bringing in? Instead, what about focusing on vocabulary development that they all need to have access to the text and the information that we're trying to teach them? Whether you are in an elementary classroom, a middle school classroom, a high school classroom. Whether or not you're teaching math, social studies, language arts, it doesn't matter. Language matters. And I'm not talking about giving them a list of words and giving them a quiz. I'm talking about social interactions where they can speak, they can process, they can interact, because that's how many of our students learn, and it's necessary to give them those opportunities. We have to think about agency that we have as educators to make sure that all of our students have access to be able to learn. Again, it starts with identity to make the connections. Representation matters, and language is a key facet of it. Don't wait for a curriculum to change when we have the power to make these changes ourselves. So I want to challenge you. I want to challenge you to think about the images that you put on your wall. I want to challenge you to think about the video clip that you show. I want to challenge you to think about the literature that you present when you're teaching certain concepts. To go beyond to make sure that multiple cultures are represented. That black and brown faces are a part of that dynamics because they're a part of the greater world. And if we are going to prepare our students to be able to achieve in a diverse environment, we have to give them the opportunity to see the beauty in differences, to see the beauty in recognize and accepting the connection that we all have when our voices and our identities are brought to the table. It requires us to be deliberate. It requires us to be thoughtful. But when we can do those things, we are truly showing that all children matter, and we don't want to leave any children behind. So when you do your next lesson plan and you think about the text that you're going to use, what are the images that you're going to show? What are the stories that you're going to tell to make sure that we are preparing our students to be successful in this world and to move forward and to understand diversity and beauty that we all have as we're working to close this achievement gap. Thank you.
Mindful of your clock. We'll come back here at 7:05, and again, there's a place in the back so you can go hang out and go to